gun drawn, finger on trigger, 10 feet behind the killer. February 21st, 1965. Audubon Ballroom, Harlem. 400 people packed into red velvet seats, unaware they were about to witness history. The air was thick with anticipation and cigarette smoke. Malcolm X stood at the podium, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Bumpy Johnson pressed against a marble pillar, his .38 revolver already halfway out of his jacket. Thomas Hagen was rising from row 3, a sawed-off shotgun emerging from beneath his coat like death itself. One bullet would save Malcolm's life. The angle was perfect. The distance was nothing. Bumpy had made harder shots in darker alleys with worse odds. But then Bumpy saw her, a 6-year-old girl in a brown Sunday dress, white ribbons in her pigtails. She had slipped from her father's lap, climbing onto her chair to see the commotion, standing directly in the line of fire. The mathematics of violence crashed through Bumpy's mind. Pull the trigger now, and the bullet tears through innocent flesh before it ever reaches the killer. Malcolm turned, not toward the shotgun aimed at his chest, toward Bumpy, as if he'd sensed his protector's presence all along. For 2 seconds that felt like hours, their eyes locked across a crowded room. No words, no movement, just two men who understood each other completely. Malcolm saw the gun in Bumpy's hand, saw the desperation, the impossible choice. Malcolm shook his head slowly, deliberate, then smiled. The smile of a man at peace with his fate. 3 words, mouthed silently across the chaos. "I'd die standing." The shotgun blast came 2 seconds later. To understand those 2 seconds, you need to know about the promise made 3 days earlier. February 18th, 1965. Malcolm X's house in Queens had just burned. Molotov cocktails through the bedroom windows. His wife Betty and 4 daughters barely escaped with their lives. The Nation of Islam wanted Malcolm dead, for leaving, for exposing corruption, for speaking truth. Bumpy Johnson walked into Columbia Presbyterian Hospital at dawn, found Malcolm in the waiting room while doctors checked his daughters for smoke injuries. Bumpy sat down, didn't say hello, got straight to the point. "Give me 48 hours. The men who did this won't see Wednesday." Malcolm was exhausted, traumatized. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but sad. "If you do that, I become everything they say I am. A hypocrite, hiding behind a gangster's gun. You'd be alive. I'd be dead inside." Malcolm turned to face him. "I've spent 10 years preaching that violence breeds violence. I can't abandon that the moment I'm scared." Bumpy's jaw tightened. "This isn't about principles, Malcolm. This is about your wife, your babies. They could have burned alive." "I know," Malcolm's voice cracked. "But if I let you kill for me, I destroy everything I've built. Violence for violence, blood for blood. That's the cycle I'm trying to break." Bumpy respected that answer. Hated it, but respected it. "Then, let me protect you. 24/7. My best men, armed, watching." Malcolm shook his head. "You're a dead man, Malcolm. You know that." "Maybe." Malcolm extended his hand. "But I'll die clean. I'll die standing." They shook hands. Bumpy held on for a moment. "They won't get away with it." "I know," Malcolm said quietly, "but don't do it for me. I've made my peace." At the door, Bumpy stopped. 3 days, Malcolm. I'm giving you 3 days to change your mind." Malcolm smiled. "I won't." Saturday night, 2:47 a.m. Bumpy's phone rang. "Mr. Johnson." The voice was shaking. "Jerome, a 19-year-old busboy who worked the graveyard shift at a diner on Malcolm X Boulevard. 3 men just left my diner. Corner booth. They were talking about handling the preacher problem. Mentioned tomorrow. Mentioned Audubon. Mentioned shotguns." Bumpy sat up in bed. "Names?" "One of them. They called him Hagen. Thomas Hagen." Bumpy closed his eyes. He knew that name. Nation of Islam enforcer. Cold, efficient, a true believer, who thought killing was holy work. "You did good, Jerome. Real good. Now forget you heard anything." Bumpy tried calling Malcolm. No answer. Sent word through every contact he had. Nothing came back. So on Sunday, February 21st, Bumpy Johnson broke his own rules. He went alone. 2:15 p.m. Audubon Ballroom was filling fast. 400 people streaming through the doors. Families, in their Sunday best. Students with notebooks and dreams. Old women who'd known Malcolm since he was a street hustler named Detroit Red. Young men who saw him as the voice of a new America. The ballroom itself was elegant. High ceilings, ornate moldings, red velvet seats, arranged in neat rows facing a simple stage. This wasn't just any venue. This was where Harlem's intellectuals came to hear ideas that could change the world. Bumpy walked in, wearing his usual dark suit, charcoal wool, perfectly tailored, white shirt, black tie, nothing flashy. He carried power in silence, authority in stillness. He surveyed the room with the eyes of a predator or a protector. Sometimes there was no difference. He positioned himself against a marble pillar on the left side, row 5. Good sightlines to the stage, close enough to act if needed. Multiple exits visible. Survival instinct never sleeps, even in holy places. His eyes moved methodically across faces. Most were regulars. Malcolm's people, teachers, preachers, writers, good people who believed words could change the world. But 3 faces didn't belong. Front section, scattered across 2 rows, still as statues while everyone else shifted, whispered, prepared for the speech. These men weren't here to listen. They were here to wait. The one in the center, row 3, was Thomas Hagen, mid-30s, medium build, the kind of man who disappeared in crowds, except for his eyes, dead eyes, the stillness of a man who'd already decided to kill. Bumpy's hand moved under his jacket, felt the familiar weight of his .38 revolver, the same gun that had settled disputes in Harlem for 15 years. He could end this right now, walk down that short aisle. 2 quick shots. Hagen and his backup dead before they hit the floor. But 400 witnesses, panic, stampede, innocent people crushed in the rush for exits. And Malcolm would just die tomorrow instead. Or next week. You can't stop fanatics by killing one. They're a sickness. You have to cut out the whole infection. So Bumpy stood by the pillar, watched, waited, and prayed to a God he rarely spoke to, that he'd get the chance to save his friend. 2:40 p.m. The moderator's voice carried through the ballroom. Brothers and sisters, I present to you Malcolm X. 400 people stood, applauded. Malcolm walked onto the stage, in a simple dark suit. No security, no bodyguards. Just a man and his message. He raised his hands for quiet. The applause faded. Everyone sat. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam, the crowd responded. Bumpy's eyes never left Hagen. He watched the killer lean forward slightly, watched his hand move inside his coat. Then chaos. Someone in the middle section jumped up shouting, "Get your hand out of my pocket. What's wrong with you?" A classic distraction. Make everyone turn. Create confusion. In that moment, the killer's move. Thomas Hagen stood. His coat fell open. The sawed-off shotgun appeared, cut down, brutal, designed to destroy. Bumpy's .38 was already in his hand, halfway out of his jacket, finger on the trigger. 10 feet, easy shot. Angle was clean. Then Bumpy saw her, the little girl, white ribbons in her pigtails. In the confusion, she had climbed up onto her chair, leaning back to look at the commotion behind her. She was directly between Bumpy and Hagen. If Bumpy fired now at that downward angle, he couldn't miss her. Bumpy's jaw clenched. He stepped left to clear the shot, blocked by people standing up. Right, same problem. That's when Malcolm turned. Not toward Hagen. Toward Bumpy, as if he'd known all along that Bumpy would be there. For 2 seconds, that felt like hours, their eyes met. In that frozen moment, Malcolm understood everything. He saw the gun in Bumpy's hand. He saw the desperation in his friend's face, the calculation, the impossible mathematics of violence. He saw the little girl between them, innocent, oblivious, leaning into the aisle in her brown Sunday dress. Malcolm knew Bumpy could pull that trigger, knew the bullet would tear through that child before it ever reached Hagen, knew Bumpy was silently asking him a question that no man should ever have to answer. Is your life worth hers? Malcolm had spent 10 years preaching that one life wasn't more valuable than another, that children were sacred, that violence in the name of justice was still violence, that the means mattered as much as the end. Now he had to prove it, not with words, not with speeches, with a choice. So Malcolm gave Bumpy the only answer a man of principle could give. He shook his head slowly, deliberately, then he smiled. Not fear, not panic, acceptance, and mouthed 3 words. I die standing. Bumpy's finger froze on the trigger. The man standing in front of Bumpy shifted suddenly, blocking the view entirely. Bumpy shoved forward, trying to boom. The shotgun blast was deafening. By the time Bumpy's line of sight cleared, Malcolm was stumbling backward, blood spreading across his chest. He tried to stay on his feet, tried to stand, but two more men rushed the stage with pistols. Firing. 16 bullets found MalcolmX. He fell, and Bumpy Johnson, the man who'd stopped Dutch Schultz, who'd faced down the Italian mafia, who'd killed without hesitation for 30 years, stood frozen, gun in hand, unable to save the one man who mattered most. The ballroom erupted. Screaming, crying, people diving under chairs, mothers throwing themselves over children. Thomas Hagen turned and ran for the exit, shotgun still in his hands, smoke still rising from the barrel. Something inside Bumpy snapped. Not the explosive kind, the cold kind, the lethal kind. He moved fast, smooth, predatory. He couldn't fire his gun. Too many people in the way. Panic everywhere. One shot and innocent people die in the crossfire. So Bumpy ran, closing the distance. 15 feet. 10. 5. Hagen was at the exit door, reaching for the handle. 30 seconds from freedom. Bumpy lunged low, swept his leg forward, hooked Hagen's ankle with perfect precision. Hagen's momentum carried him forward, but his feet went backward. He crashed face first onto the polished ballroom floor. The shotgun flew from his hands, spinning across the wood. Bumpy kicked it hard, sent it sliding under a row of overturned chairs. Gone. Hagen scrambled to his knees, wild-eyed, reaching for the pistol in his waistband. Bumpy grabbed his wrist, twisted. The small revolver clattered away. Then Bumpy did something unexpected. He didn't kill Hagen, didn't beat him, didn't pull his own gun. Bumpy had a reason for not pulling that trigger. It wasn't mercy. It was never mercy. If he fired, he'd be the only man found with a smoking gun when the cops arrived. It would turn a martyrdom into a gangland shootout. Bumpy couldn't do that to Malcolm's legacy. More importantly, dead men don't talk. Hagen needed to talk. He needed to say who gave the order, who funded it, who sanctioned it, and most of all, this man took Malcolm from the people, so Bumpy was going to give him back to the people. He grabbed Hagen by the collar, lifted him halfway up, then shoved him backward into the surging crowd. 20 men rushed forward. They just watched MalcolmX get murdered, watched him fall, and now the killer was right there. A fist connected with Hagen's jaw, then another. Then 5 more hands grabbing, pulling, beating. Bumpy stepped back. Let them have him. Let them deliver the justice the courts couldn't. He leaned close to the mob, voice low but carrying. Don't let him breathe. Don't let him run. Make him answer for what he did. The crowd understood. They pinned Hagen to the floor, held him down like a wild animal. Police sirens wailed outside, getting closer. Bumpy Johnson walked calmly toward the side exit. Through the chaos, through the crying, through the smoke still hanging in the air. By the time police flooded through the front doors, Bumpy was 3 blocks away, disappearing into Harlem streets like he'd never been there at all. Behind him, Thomas Hagen was on the ground, bleeding, beaten, but alive. Alive to stand trial. Alive to rot in prison. Alive to spend every day for the rest of his life, knowing he failed, knowing MalcolmX died standing. Knowing Harlem never forgets. MalcolmX was pronounced dead at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital at 3:30 p.m., 16 gunshot wounds. 39 years old, gone. Bumpy didn't go to the hospital. Couldn't. Too many cops, too many questions, too much attention for a man who'd just watched America's most important voice get silenced forever. Instead, he went to a place he hadn't visited in years. St. Philip's Church, on West 134th Street. Small, quiet, empty, on a Sunday evening, the kind of place where a man could sit with his guilt and his God. He sat in the last pew, alone, still wearing his blood-stained jacket. Malcolm's blood mixed with Thomas Hagen's. The stains told a story of protection and justice, of choices made in impossible moments. The old priest, Father Callahan, found him there, an hour later, Irish accent softened by 40 years in Harlem. "You don't come here," the priest said softly, sliding into the pew in front of him. "No," Bumpy replied, staring at the simple wooden cross hanging above the altar. "But I'm here now." The silence stretched between them, sacred and heavy. "I was 10 feet away," Bumpy finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had my gun out. Clear shot. I could have stopped it. But there was a little girl, 6 years old, right in the line of fire." Father Callahan studied Bumpy's face, saw the weight of the world in those tired eyes. So you chose the child's life over Malcolm's? Malcolm chose it. Bumpy's voice cracked like old leather. He looked at me, saw my gun, and he shook his head, told me to let him go, told me to let him die standing. Then you gave him what he wanted. I gave him death. Bumpy's hands clenched into fists. I could have moved, could have found another angle, could have done something, but I froze, and I watched the greatest man I ever knew get murdered. The priest was quiet for a long moment. Malcolm X lived his entire life preparing to die for his beliefs. You didn't take that from him. You honored it. Honoring it doesn't bring him back. No, but Malcolm knew what he was choosing. He chose integrity over survival. He chose to die standing rather than live on his knees. Not many men have that courage. Bumpy stood up slowly, buttoned his jacket over the bloodstains that would never fully wash out. Hagen's alive. The crowd beat him, but he'll live to stand trial. And the others? Bumpy's expression went cold. Winter in July. There were 3 shooters. Hagen's in custody. The other 2 ran. Will they escape? No. Bumpy's voice was ice and iron. They won't. And Bumpy Johnson kept that promise. Within 6 months, the other 2 shooters were found, not by police, by Harlem, by Bumpy's network. They never stood trial. They just disappeared. The history books don't mention that part. The history books say Thomas Hagen was convicted and the other 2 escaped justice. But ask anyone who lived in Harlem in 1965. They'll tell you different. At Malcolm's funeral, Betty Shabazz saw Bumpy standing in the back, against the wall, watching. Their eyes met across the crowded church. She nodded once. Small, sad, acknowledged. She knew. She knew Bumpy had been there. She knew he'd tried. She knew Thomas Hagen was in custody because Bumpy made sure he couldn't run. After the service, Bumpy walked alone to Ferncliff Cemetery where Malcolm would be buried. He stood at the edge of the open grave, looking down at the casket. From his pocket, he pulled out something small, his straight razor, the one he'd carried for 30 years, the symbol of his power, his survival, his coat. He placed it gently on the coffin lid. You died standing, Bumpy said quietly, just like you wanted. But the men who killed you, they're going to die scared. That's my promise. 3 years later, Bumpy Johnson died at Wells Restaurant in Harlem. Heart attack, no violence, no shootout. Just an old warrior's heart finally giving out. At his funeral, someone asked one of Bumpy's oldest friends, what was Bumpy's greatest moment? The friend thought for a long time, then said, February 21st, 1965. When he sat in that ballroom with his gun drawn and respected Malcolm's choice, even though it killed him inside. That's when Bumpy proved he wasn't just a gangster. He was a man of honor. Bumpy Johnson had killed for money, for power, for respect, for survival. But on that Sunday afternoon, he chose not to kill, chose to honor a friend's wish, chose to let Malcolm X die standing with dignity on his own terms. That's not in the history books. But it should be, because sometimes the hardest thing a man with a gun can do is not pull the trigger. Sometimes the bravest thing a killer can do is let someone die. Malcolm X died standing, and Bumpy Johnson made sure the world remembered that. If this story of honor, sacrifice, and impossible choices moved you, hit that subscribe button and smash that like. Share this with someone who needs to understand what real strength looks like. Drop a comment. Would you have pulled the trigger? And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more untold stories from the streets that made history.